Well,
Well, this will be interesting to see.
Well, oh my gosh.
Oh my.
well,
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 okay, I'll do it.
okay. Here's what I remember.
Grand Mound is a little town, and Mom was born and raised there. Her dad was a barber. There were 8 in her family. She had 5 sisters and 2 brothers. Lived her whole life in Grand Mound, and Dad lived near Lost Nation. And of course, Mom was one of 6 girls and 2 boys, and they were a very close-knit family.
Mom talked about her home life a lot. She really loved her family so much, and she talked about her mom singing at Christmas time. And her dad sounds like just a very kind, gentle kind of man.
Grandma and all the kids were very Catholic, and back in those days you didn't marry non-Catholics, and Grandpa was not Catholic. But Mom always told how supportive he was. They lived near the church, and that Grandpa would shovel the sidewalks and things at the church before church, even though he wasn't a member.
I think they had a very nice life, but not a lot of money.
It was the Depression years when Mom was young. But they always had enough, because they would have like a big garden, and Grandpa was a barber. And so he made as much of a living as anyone could, I imagine, though people had to get haircuts.
Her dad was a barber and a volunteer fireman. I remember thinking it was really funny because whenever there was a fire in the town, my grandpa would get up and go to this fire. And then Mom said that her mother would stand at the bottom of the steps and go, "Fire, fire, everybody up." And they all had to get up and get dressed during the middle of the night, no matter where the fire was in that town.
She would tell some kind of interesting stories about things like what they did for their entertainment was roller skate. But then when you got really good at roller skating, you would use a broom handle and use that just sort of to stabilize you so you could be a little more adventuresome as you skated. And I'm sure that was very lovely to watch. But she said that was a big day when you graduated to the broomstick. They were very efficient, organized people, and that's how they raised their family.
I know that my dad was raised on a farm with his Irish mom and dad and brothers and sisters, and I don't really know too much more about them than that.
I think they were very poor, and it doesn't sound like his parents were very nice people. I think it was a pretty tough childhood for my dad.
Dad talked very little about his childhood.
But he didn't really talk about it a lot. He had 5 brothers and sisters, and I think he too was the second from the youngest. And I think they grew up in kind of a hard scrabble life. You know, they were farmers, and Dad's dad, we never really knew what his diagnosis was, but it seemed that he was kind of a sickly man.
I remember my dad one time saying, we said something about being close to his family, and he says, we were so busy plucking or picking, they didn't have time to be together, which was kind of sad.
As I got a little older, he told a few stories, some that were pretty interesting. Some of the stunts he had pulled, like tying a calf up to a rope on a schoolhouse bell, so it walked around, and every time it moved, ring the bell all night. And feeding fodder to calves and turn them loose in the schoolhouse, which fodder works like a laxative for cattle.
I never knew my dad's side of the family as well as I knew Mom's side. But knowing the ones that I did, it was quite clear to see that organization, structure, and stuff in Dad's family was not a priority. Or at least it wasn't an achieved priority. They didn't seem to manage that real well.
He lived on a farm and had to drop out of high school when he was in 10th grade. But he always was interested in what was going on in the world.
I think he really liked school, but he was called upon way too much to help at home, which I think was quite common for that day and age. And he was such a smart man. It's a shame he wasn't able to use that for more than he did,
He loved to do math. He would always have math puzzles or math kind of games, fun things for us to do.
And now I'm a math teacher, that's why, because I got that love of math from my dad. And I think a whole bunch of our family did, our generation and the next generations. Mom wanted to go to a Catholic boarding school in Clinton. And they didn't have enough money, of course, for a Catholic boarding school. So she and her cousin, Marcella O'Brien, hitchhiked to Clinton and asked the nuns if they could work their way through boarding school. And the nuns agreed to it. And Mom and Marcella worked their way through Mount St. Clair. Mom did typing and she played the piano. She was really a good piano player.
I don't know if she even read music, to be perfectly honest, but she could play by ear beautifully. And so when they would do things, have get-togethers, sometimes even dances, Mom would be the pianist for them.
She loved those years. I know in her yearbook it talks about her playing the piano and everybody singing around. And she was valedictorian of her class.
Somehow they instilled in us just that we would all be educated. I don't ever remember that discussion. It just was always a part of what we knew our futures would hold.
You know, I think that it was always just assumed that we'd all go on to further education.
They met at a dance, but there's kind of a discrepancy there where the dance was, but they met at a dance, which most people did back then. That was very common.
Mom claimed that they met at some church social.
Dad thought it was at a dance, maybe.
I can't remember for sure, but they had different versions of how they met.
One thought they met at a dance and one thought they met at some kind of a, I don't know, church thing.
I would bet money it was the dance.
Mom worked at the bank, and I think they met in the bank.
I was going to say at a dance maybe, but I don't know.
I think the answer is we haven't a clue.
They met at a dance. They were married in Grand Mound.
What happened next was Mom was pregnant for most of the next 20 years.
It was a wonderful upbringing. I remember everything being good, and I know there were days when it wasn't good, but for the most part it was wonderful. They started, I think we lived in Grand Mound briefly. I think myself and Pat and Jan were born there. But then we moved to Chicago, and that's where we lived while I had the first 6. And so, you know, I have some memories of Chicago. I can picture our apartment very clearly, and the neighborhood, and the park that we went to. And my most memorable thing about going to kindergarten was that we didn't have an outdoor playground, but we had an indoor large sandbox, it seems to me, in the kindergarten room. So that is the most memorable thing I have of the school in Chicago, was the indoor sandbox. We lived there till I was 7, and we came back to Iowa. Yep, and we came back to Iowa.
I can remember waking up on our farm when I was probably in lower elementary school and looking out the window on a summer day and seeing my mom always planted iris and tiger lilies all along the edge of the yard, and then behind that was the field, and of course no air conditioning in those days, so that summer breeze coming in the window, and it just felt like heaven. We didn't have to go, you know, school was out and this was summer, and it was wonderful.
Oh, they were not very nice farmhouses. We were lucky if we had an inside toilet. We were lucky if we had running water and all that kind of stuff, you know. Mostly we had. There was one place we didn't have inside toilet, but we did have running water.
Most of my memories are, we called it the Fraser place, because that's where I was in junior high and high school. No bathroom. In the summer we kind of had a half bathroom. We had an old summer kitchen, and Dad put a bathtub out there.
It wasn't very private, and we would put water in the bathtub, and there was, like, they called it a little donut, which sounds like we should have been electrocuted. But you plugged this little donut into the wall, in the outlet, and it warmed up our water in the bathtub, and about 3 of us would take a bath, or 5 maybe, in the same bath water. Can you imagine? When you're done, you pulled the plug and it just run out in the ground.
But we had one sink, the kitchen sink. That's where we, in the mornings, where we all had to brush our teeth and get ready for school. We managed somehow. for a 2-year spell, I guess. We went to school in Elwood, right next door. And then we moved back to Lost Nation. And one of the little kids went home and said, "Mom, guess what? The Carrahers are back in town." The Carrahers.
Our house was always clean. I don't know how she did it.
Saturday night was start getting ready for go to church. You know, everybody had a bath, and you lined up all the shoes and polished all the shoes. And of course, like I said, everybody had to wear a hat, you know, and of course you wore dresses and things.
I don't remember ever considering not going to church. I mean, it was a tradition in our family. We were certainly all taught to know who God was, and I'm really glad for that background.
It was an important part of our family, and it gave us a good foundation. We might not have always gotten as much out of it as you might think we should. In college, my mom would separate us because we'd get giggling and such, but it was a good routine and it gave us a good foundation.
You know, it was a real effort to get that many people to church. Well, then we got a Hudson at some stage. Big old wide boats, and we could layer quite a few in there.
Had a '59 Ford Galaxy station wagon. Well, I think it was probably been a Fairlane. It was a Ford station wagon anyway. And we all had our assigned seats.
And my place where I sat was over the wheel well in the back seat. And I think maybe your mom might have sat on the other wheel well. But we had very assigned seats. We knew exactly who was going to be sitting where.
And they were layered. You knew who was on the bottom row of the back seat and who was sitting on laps. Think of how many that was. And that was our regular transportation.
Mom had to do quite a bit of prodding to get everybody going on schedule sometimes.
But that was a very important part of our week, so you never thought of taking a shortcut with church, you know. Everybody went to church, yeah.
And in the summer, the nuns came for about, I think it was a week, maybe 2 weeks. And we didn't have a community room or any such thing at our church, so we just were paired off in little sections in the church by age. And the nuns would teach us, I don't know what they taught us, prayers or whatever. And I can't remember very much of what we learned, but it was fun. We looked forward to it every summer. And then on the last day we had a picnic. That was one of our big events. We had pop, which we hardly ever had at home. I don't know if we ever had it at home, I can't remember. And the older kids from the church, they were probably 8th or 9th graders, who knows, and they would help the priest bring in this pop with dry ice, and we were so impressed with that.
I can remember coming home from school and there'd be clotheslines with clothes, the lines would be full of clothes. And then in the wintertime, when we'd come home from school, even the dad's work clothes would be out there, we'd bring them in and they'd be frozen, and then they'd stand up for a while till they thawed out. She just hung them out. We didn't have such a thing as a dryer. We were just lucky to have a washing machine, you know.
When we would come home from school, almost always there was an after-school treat for us that was unfortunately something sweet. But you'd walk into the door and here would be this wonderful fragrance of something baking in the oven and the house clean and neat, and Mom welcoming us home.
We'd come home from school and she might have made homemade bread, and we'd have a whole loaf of homemade bread for lunch with jelly on it or whatever, you know. That was our after-school treat. Or she'd have a big pot of goulash or a big pot of chili or spaghetti. She always had everything cleaned up. We came home to never a dirty house, other than this clothes hanging all over the place.
I would say more than the way she decorated a house, it was the way she maintained a house. Everything was always neat and tidy, and it was clean. You know, we couldn't afford expensive accessories and things like that. We couldn't even afford really good floor coverings and stuff a lot of the time, but whatever we had was kept well. And just having it clean and neat made it very welcoming.
Mom had a way of making it a home anyway. I remember, you know, we moved several times, and she'd always say, "We need to get curtains hung, because once you hang curtains, it feels more like a home." Mom never worked while we 6 oldest kids were home. She was always, when we'd come home after school, everything would be neat and clean. She'd have supper on the stove, but then the 6 younger kids, it was altogether different for them, you know. They have altogether different memories than we older kids do. The 6 big kids and the 6 little kids.
After my dad got hurt, he was hurt in an automobile accident and some elderly woman hit some loose gravel, hit his car, and he got a bit of a settlement. I don't know how much it was, but up until this time, we had never owned our homes. And so now Mom and Dad had a little bit of money to buy a farm. And so they didn't have quite enough money to buy a farm in Iowa, where they were a little bit more expensive, but they looked in Wisconsin, and they bought 2 farms in Casanova, Wisconsin. One of the farms cost $10,500, and the other one was around $13,000. The older 3 kids grew up mostly in Iowa, and the younger 6 grew up mostly in Wisconsin. But us middle 3, Judy, Jerry, and I, actually were split. So we spent our younger years in Iowa and our high school and college years in Wisconsin. So we were sort of divided.
Paul was only he wasn't even a year old when we moved from Iowa to Wisconsin. And I remember Iowa, but not greatly. I was only in 1st grade. And so most of my memories are from Wisconsin.
Mom and Dad, when I think of it, they had a room that could barely accommodate a double bed and a dresser. And that was the only downstairs room. And I think now, what a little room they were crammed into. And that was just what they did. They, provided for all of us.
For a long time, Paul and I had roll-away beds that folded up into Mom and Dad's tiny bedroom when we get up in the morning, and then we slept in the dining room. That was when we still had a guest room. But then as more went on to college and such, then we got to broaden out. So then I shared a bedroom with Camilla, Gloria, and Kathy. So just the 4 of us in the pink room.
I think the farm life was such a good life, growing up in the country especially. I know it was hard work. I remember baling hay in the summers, all of us girls, even remember seeing the tractor come and would come back from the field, and we'd all go out to the barn and help unload. And then we girls helped load the wagon with the hay too, but we weren't that good at it. So we would help, but then if Tom or Paul were there, they would always do the front of the load so it wouldn't fall off.
Started milking the cow when Jerry graduated, so I was 8 years old when he graduated. But I milked before I went to school in the morning. I think the first couple of years Dad still fed the cattle, but because of his arthritis he couldn't do the milking. And then when I got into high school, Paul had to do chores at night so I could stay after school for football practice. So I got out of night chores then.
Oh, we love to work outside. To this day, once I get out there, I love to be out there because my dad was hurt in his car accident, and so we go out and do the field work and a little 2-row plow, and you'd have to plow 60 acres or whatever. And of course, now they can get 60 acres down in about 3 swipes,
Jan and I did a lot of field work as we got older. And I loved field work because I could just daydream the whole time. And if I'd happened to take out a few hills of corn, I'd get down off the tractor and replant them, and then I'd go on my way.
I like to go out and help Dad. And I would go out on the tractor with him, and we'd cut corn and put it in the manure spreader and bring it back and feed it to the pigs. And I liked riding on the tractor with him and doing that me and my dad thing. And then we'd come in, and he drank tea, so I'd drink hot tea because Dad did.
From a very young age, as long as I can remember, we had jobs raising pickles, picking rocks, things where we'd make minuscule amounts, but then they would have it divided by age, what percentage you got, because the older ones worked harder, and they taught us when we'd maybe earn $1, how much of it would go into savings, how much would go into tithing, how much was discretionary income, and it was pennies. But I think they taught us life skills.
We really grew up with a strong work ethic, but we also had lots of fun. We liked board games and puzzles and ping pong, and the neighborhood kids would come sometimes and we'd play football or baseball.
Bailey's would be up there, and parents would be playing cards, and we'd just be doing whatever kids do.
We fought, but we also had tons of fun.
We did. We would wrestle and chase after each other and lock each other out of rooms. And I remember one time one of the Baileys came to visit, Jeanette came to visit, and I was, she came upstairs and I didn't know it, and I'm hitting Gloria with a belt. And when she walked in, Jeanette walked in, I said, "Oh, we're just playing?" Gloria goes, "No, we're not."
Mom used to tell us we fought more than any kids in Clinton County. And I'm sure we probably did, but I don't remember that. I just remember the fun.
We always enjoyed having each other to play with. We always had somebody to do things with because we lived out in the country and we weren't signed up for t-ball or anything, you know, any activities like we all take our kids to. So we always did play games together. I remember in the summers we had so much fun. We'd meet in the valley between our house and Briggs's house, and their family would come, we'd come, Rigos would come, Lewis's would come, and we'd all play ball together. You know, it didn't matter what age, and we'd just divvy up the teams, and for us it was like going to a Twins game, except we got to be the players.
But we'd play with the neighbor kids, and I said I'd play from 4-year-old to 18-year-olds would play, and seriously, football and stuff. We had the neighbors, the Waslick boys, who were just tougher than nails, and we'd play tackle football with them, you know, and they were quite a bit older, and they were just super athletes. I got into high school, and they put pads on, and kids were my own age. It's like, this is easy, you know, but that's you played with whoever, and if you played, like, you wouldn't have enough for teams, so you had all different games, like you'd play work up, you know, you could play with several people, or five, if you only had a few people, 500, that you just played with whoever, and some of the neighbors you really liked, and some you played with because they were your neighbors, some of it both, you know.
We'd play in the haymow, and a few accidents happened there.
I remember Paul breaking his toes.
Kathy falling out and breaking her arm, and me breaking my toes.
Laura getting a concussion.
Cut my head kind of bad coming out of the haymow one time.
Jerry really, a real severe cut on the calf of his leg.
Probably should have had stitches, but we didn't bother with much such things back then.
You know, never very much time goes by that I don't think about Jerry. I'd say a lot of days of my life I still think about Jerry.
He was such a gentle, kind guy. Everybody loved Jerry.
Oh, he was just a happiest-go-lucky guy, you know, just nice to everybody. Everybody liked him, you know.
We all loved Jerry.
You know, he was such a special brother because at one time we had 8 girls and 1 boy. So he was such a special brother, and he was such a sensitive brother. Of course, he was a novelty, you know, after the 5 girls. He was always a good little boy, a very, very good little boy. And I remember when Mom, just to entertain him, he'd write grocery lists. So if she was probably canning tomatoes or something, but he'd be writing his grocery list. And of course, he couldn't write, he was about 4, you know, he'd just scribble. She'd say jelly, spaghetti. But every time she said peanut butter, he said, "I don't know how to spell that." He couldn't spell anything, but he didn't know how to spell that. We'd play school, and of course he was the youngest and would be more disruptive. So we'd always told him that boys got to be janitors. And we'd give him a broom and put him off somewhere else, you know, to be the janitor while we held classes.
We had a double bed and then a double cot. They weren't the same heights, but they were right, you know, you could just walk from one to the other, and then you couldn't, it was wall to wall. We'd all sleep in there, and Jerry would tell us stories.
And he would tell us stories about this fictional character that he made up, Punkitis, while we were in bed. And I don't know how many of us were in those beds or how we all slept in that room, but I just remember Punkitis.
I don't know how many of us would sleep in there because that was the warmest room.
He taught me how to ride bikes. Tried to teach me how to do handsprings. Well, he did. Did get to where I could do handsprings and walk on my hand. I could never do the flips with all my hands. And he could do all that stuff, of course. He was a really good athlete.
And cards, of course, I love to play cards with him. And what always amazed us is he knew every card that every person had. Yeah, I mean, he's a good guy, just a good guy.
And I remember him juggling with croquet balls and even with butcher knives.
He used to juggle, and one day he juggled croquet balls, and hit himself in the head and knocked himself out.
I do believe he hit himself in the head with one.
Probably one of the biggest things I remember is when we go to the Platteville family reunion, is we'd eat and we want to go swimming and wanted Jerry to go with so bad, you know, but he liked to play cards, but he'd always fit in time somewhere to go swimming, and he was, you know, he already, you know, Carrie was born then and stuff, but he'd always go over and go swimming with you for a bit, you know, and that was probably one of the biggest things with him, you know.
I just loved that guy, and we all did. I remember, like, when I was in college, we would go spend weekends with he and Vicki, you know, and they always welcomed our friends. We'd go and go skiing there and just have a blast with them.
Another one that was funny about Jerry, he was always good at everything and a little bit cocky. So he had never been skiing, but some of the younger kids had been skiing, so they were going to all go skiing. And beginner skiers usually start with the shorter skis. So they told Jerry that as a beginner, he should get the longest skis possible. So they had Jerry out there with these long skis, never having skied before, falling down everywhere. And the kids were all just loving it totally.
And at family reunions, I know I always couldn't wait to show him my grandkids, and first my kids and then my grandkids, and he was just such a good guy.
Well, we probably all want to claim a special closeness with Jerry, but so even when he was sick, it was just so good to go and spend that time with him.
Jerry was already quite sick at this point, and for many years he and I had gone together to a Badger game in Madison and loved Badger basketball together. But now he was quite sick, so we couldn't be going anymore, and I was visiting one weekend, and we found the game on the radio. It wasn't on television, lacrosse, so we went into the music room, and Jerry and I laid down on the floor together with our pillows and with the Badger game on, and enjoyed our last Badger game together.
And he was very ill, and he was sleeping in his recliner, and I was reading on the couch, and it was snowing, just a beautiful snow. And he had been asleep a long time. And I stood up and was looking out the window just because it was beautiful. And he woke up, but I didn't know it. And he said, "Don't worry, Lori, I'll drive you home." You know, he couldn't walk without assistance, certainly couldn't drive, and I lived 3 hours away. But he was always the loving, caring, protective.
Inspired me.
It seems like on weekends that very often we had people there, like our older sisters that would come home, and they always brought friends with them. So that was a big treat for us, just to have, you know, our sisters and brothers come home and bring either their husbands or their new babies or college friends before that.
Whenever we'd be home, there would be piano music and Carraher girls gathered round to sing, which was a real blessing.
I don't even remember the 6 oldest living at home, but I don't remember the 3 oldest not being married, but I remember the anticipation anytime anybody was coming home from college or wherever it was.
We were dirt poor, I'm sure, but I don't think we realized. And the kids always hung out at our house, and yeah, and it wasn't, it was a pretty stripped down house, let me tell you.
Nobody had a lot of money in those parts, but looking back now, I realize we had less. But I thought that the people who had more than we did were just well off. I thought that they were kind of, you know, well, they were just kind of rich, and we're not rich. I thought that was normal, which says a lot for Mom and Dad and how we were raised.
Cazenovia, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of good people, and a lot of the characters are good people, but there are characters, that's for sure.
They always welcomed any of our friends, anytime at all. Yep.
We always had an open door. I think of Jimmy and Otto Fuller and Bailey's and Honers and adults that would just stop in because they knew the coffee pot was always on. And every time anybody stopped, we had a 3-tiered metal tray. I'm sure it wasn't an expensive one, but we only used it for Christmas. And every time I filled it, which was often, I think it was the most beautiful thing in the world, and just that hospitality extended all the time.
Christmas was wonderful. You know, we didn't have much money, so it was never a material holiday. But Mom had a gift for creating atmosphere, and so Christmas was all about decorating the house and cutting down a Christmas tree and baking and fixing plates of food to share.
Christmas was magical. Mom was great at making Christmas really wonderful.
Mom would play the piano, and we'd all sing Christmas carols and things. It was a very simple kind of holiday, but wonderful, lasting memories. It really was. It was just wonderful.
We had a big hill, so we used to have sleigh riding parties. And we had an English teacher, and his name was Mr. DeLashmuth, and he was a character. But he loved to come to our house, and we'd have hot chocolate, you know, for treat after we went sleigh riding.
And we'd always go to midnight mass, and we'd come home and eat. Santa Claus came in the morning, yeah. Santa Claus came in the morning. But the littlest holiday, she'd make it a big one, yeah. And Dad, I don't think growing up ever did much of that, so he really enjoyed it. He loved all that because she made it a big deal, and his family hadn't.
I can remember from a very young age how fun it was. We'd go to Reedsburg Christmas shopping, and they would pipe music into the streets, and I thought that was so classy. And of course, we would buy our own gifts with our own money from our pickle money, but they were humble. I don't have a clue what they were, but I can remember what fun it was to look for just the right thing for each one.
Midnight mass on Christmas was, and then meal afterwards. Kind of late for little kids, but we didn't seem to mind at all.
But we would have usually ham and a special salad that we liked, and Mom made some rolls called Parker House rolls. And that's what we would have when we got home from midnight mass.
And Mom made Parker House rolls, and Mom wasn't one for making yeast bread, but that was a treat for the holidays. She would make Parker House rolls.
We always had ham and cheese and pickles and homemade bread, Parker House rolls.
They were just so much fun when people come around, and the baking and the Christmas cookies down in the freezer that you'd go down and you'd only sneak one out of one box and one out of another box because you didn't want to, you know, if you took 4 out of one, Mom's going to know. And I imagine that she probably made a bunch extra because I don't think I was the only one to do it. So I got the feeling by the time Christmas came, we'd all hit it quite a bit, and I imagine that the containers were probably about 2/3 full by the time then.
It was a big kitchen. We spent a lot of time in that kitchen, baking, listening to Perry Como music and various things while we were doing Christmas baking. A lot of action in that kitchen, huh?
But we all helped. I remember Mom the night before getting things ready for, you know, chopping up breadcrumbs and celery and stuff for the dressing and all of the homemade things that she would make and all of the baking. We could start the day after Thanksgiving baking and freezing things and stuff. So I remember them very fondly, all of those holidays.
She'd be making holiday meals, make one to go, and we'd deliver them.
And part of our Christmas was making up trees, you know, to send to people in the neighborhood that didn't do much for Christmas and things like that.
Sometimes as kids we were like, oh brother, who's Mom going to have in now? But she would invite people like that. And then once they moved into town, there were several bachelors in the town that she would make up whole plates of Thanksgiving dinner for, or Christmas, and we'd run them around and deliver them before the meal.
This is something we should do, so we did.
Decorating the Christmas trees were just one of the best times, and everybody was involved.
But I remember feeling so special when we got to be part of that, preparing for that, and then waiting for the older kids to come home for Christmas. You know, the ones that didn't live at home anymore. We always just cherished that.
Being excited about the older kids coming home, whether it was the kids from Iowa coming up, or then when like Judy, Margot, and Jerry moved away to college and got married and stuff. It was always great to have the older kids home.
When we moved to Wisconsin, the first few years Mom and Dad were really strapped for money then. And I remember the first year we were there wasn't much money for Christmas gifts, and Phyllis came up with bunches of presents for all of us.
Our gifts were very, very small, but we had wonderful times. Like Mom said one time she'd have like $50 to spend at Christmas time, and that was for gifts for everybody, for baking, for everything. And I mean, $50 even back then is amazing when you have 12 kids.
there were always a lot of gifts because there were so many of us. And Mom did things like year after, almost always we get a new pair of pajamas, and then she would make us little slippers that were made out of washcloths. And we all remember how those were done. So, you know, she would probably buy the cheapest washcloth she could find and make 12 pair of slippers. But those were part of our gifts. But then there was almost always something that was grand.
And I think we wrapped everything in tissue paper. I'm sure that was the cheapest. It seemed like we had red and white and green tissue paper and curly Q, you know, ribbon. And probably one of the really cool gifts I remember in later years, Paul got a racetrack set. And we older kids, after he'd go to bed at night, we would play with it. And we had so much fun with it. And I remember that we wore the batteries right out of it before Christmas. So we had to had to get new batteries before we gave it to Paul.
We got the same thing every year for Christmas, it seemed like. We'd always get one little present, and then we'd either get, I can't even remember for sure, whether it would be pajamas or underwear, but we just thought it was the most wonderful thing ever, and we knew kind of what we were going to get.
A lot of times they were practical things, you know, new mittens and socks and pajamas, you know. And I know we must have gotten some toys and dolls. I like dolls, and I remember, you know, getting dolls.
My favorite gift in the world, twin pearl-handled pistols in plastic holsters. They were the envy of every neighborhood boy.
I remember one year for Christmas, I had decided that probably for my career I would be a professional ice skater. And I hadn't ice skated before, but that looked so glamorous to me. But they were $20. And I knew that was way too grand for our budget. So Mom and Dad and I sat down before Christmas and talked about it, and we decided I could pay $10, and then they could cough up the other 10, and I got my ice skates.
Bailey's, I remember they would get like all this stuff, and I'd think, that is ridiculous, they get that much for Christmas. I kind of thought theirs was like excess, and that mine was just right. And I really remember thinking that, you know, at the time. I never thought, I wish I got all that stuff. I thought I got so much. And then when they got more, I thought, that's kind of over the top, you know.
And I do remember, you know, that a lot of the kids in school and stuff, I remember all the stuff they'd get for Christmas. And we would get our one big gift, which would be pretty small and some little stuff, but it always seemed like plenty.
Christmas was the best there. I would love the Christmases there. And it really does still make me nostalgic. In a good way,
Growing up, there was some tension, but in later years, they seemed pretty close. They're both being firm Catholics. There was never any thought of divorce. It's just, this is the way it is. You deal with it.
I wouldn't say that they were the most in love, passionate couple I've ever seen, but I think they loved each other in their own way.
Dad was a drinker, and those years weren't very good between them, but I think in later years that they had a really good relationship. Mom took good care of Dad when he was sick, and I think they enjoyed those years once they moved into Cass, into town, and they had the screen porch. They would sit out there together, and as my dad would say, watch the traffic pass by.
I was around more for their, I think, the better part of their life, you know, where Dad had quit drinking, and financially they were a little more secure, and I think it was very good at the end, you know, and I think there was a lot of struggle throughout the years, but I think they really enjoyed their later years together.
I think it was more in the later years that their relationship grew closer, which was nice to see.
After we were all raised and gone in those last few years that they were in Cass together, they just loved going out just for lunch or something, you know, and then different things we found of Mom's. She had little prayers and stuff she had, and one was something about how she'd be so happy to be with Phil in heaven again. So, yeah, I think they really, I think they did. Yeah, I think they did. I think the thing that I appreciate most about our family is the unconditional love. Nobody is judgmental. We accept anybody and everybody, and I think that impresses me more than anything.
I think it is tolerance, because we certainly don't all have the same values, the same lifestyles, the same religions, the same goals, but everybody accepts everybody where they're at.
I think just the way we were brought up to, love and respect everybody, and, and we do. We accept anybody or anything, I mean, they are all special. That's all there is to it, yeah.
I think that what draws people, what brings each of us together and our children and their children, is that when we're together, every one of us are imperfect, but we're all very accepted by everyone else. And when you're here, at least I think, and my family, my children agree with me, that you feel completely accepted and loved. And I think every one of us in this world can use that feeling of complete love, complete acceptance, and just being surrounded by people who feel so strongly about one another.
But that's one of the major things. You can have any kind of personality, or we have several people who have some kind of disabilities. We actually have quite a few with various things going on. We have people who have, have personal problems in their lives. And I think everybody wants the best for everybody else. Yeah, no matter what the situation is. I think it's very accepting, yes.
Our love for each other and each other's families overrides any kind of judgment or thinking that somebody isn't doing things exactly like we do. With 100 people, we're not all alike by any means, but we seem to all love each other's kids and grandkids, accept each other and each other's kids and grandkids, no matter what our beliefs are, or how we live, or how we've lived, or what we do. It just seems like there's an unconditional love.
I think there's a few things. I think one of them is that we do really love one another a lot and value each other. And I love the way that when we come together, that anybody with special needs, people shower affection and love on. And that we rally around one another.
I think it's just the love that we have for each other. We were really shown that by Mom and Dad. We were taught to stick together, and part of it was because of where we grew up and how many of us there were, and just this strong family bond that we all have. And I just hope and pray that my kids will have those kind of bonds with each other. I think there's really probably nobody I'd rather spend time with than my own Carraher family, and and then our own kids and extended family like that. And I think that is a true blessing in this day and age.
Part of it's just luck of the draw. We all came out with personalities that appreciate what we had, and the way we were the way Mom and Dad raised us was a big part of it, I'm sure.
We like humor, we like diversity, we like being outside the box, and I think a lot of us are. But I think the bottom line is we accept and love each other regardless. And we have a lot of variety in a lot of ways, but I think every single one feels fully embraced.
None of us are perfect, and I think everybody's just so accepting, maybe is part of the biggest thing. And I think everybody's so accepting of everybody else's family or anybody that comes in, that I think that's it. And I think it's just the values that were instilled with us growing up, and maybe, like I said, that Mom was just good to everybody. That maybe that's why.
Now this is quite a crew, quite a crew.